we're going to turn this into this. Hi, welcome to this three-part series on how to build an arcade. This build is heavily inspired by the Catcade in Chicago, which had a tabletop arcade with a little cat snuggle area in the bottom. This build went through a huge evolution over a long time, and I ended up with the design over a long process. In part, one we're going to be building today is an arcade cabinet to house everything inside. So when we build it, we're actually going to be using walnut, cherry, birch, and pine plywoods. But obviously you can use whichever wood you'd like to use and whatever is available to you. I don't actually own a Festool domino, so instead we're going to be doing all of our joinery with mortise and tenons, and those are going to be done on the router and table saws. And of course using that to cut and the bandsaw to bring things down. For flattening and squaring the wood, I'm going to be using a jointer and a thickness planer, but if you don't have those readily available, you can probably find a local woodworker to help you or use hand planes to get you there. Okay, let's get started. We're going to start by cutting down the 12-quarter cherry and the walnut boards to rough dimensions. By doing this, you can release some of the stress on the board and see what kind of cleanup needs to happen. The difference between the cherry and walnut boards here is that the cherry is rough sawn and the walnut has already been milled before I got it. One thing I want you to notice, like I mentioned before about the stress on the boards, safety tip. The walnut is starting to turn down. Board stress can move the wood in any direction, and it's especially important to feel how the wood is going through the blade, and watch the other side, in case bad things are starting to happen. Right now we're going to be doing some rough crosscuts. We don't need to be very precise here, we just need to make sure that we're breaking it up into small pieces so that when we do put it on the jointer, it makes it easier to flatten. Choosing the right face to start jointing is very important. I look for twists, bows, and cups in the wood and decide how to flatten it best. If you want more information on proper jointing techniques, you can look for dedicated jointing videos to help. Most of what I saw from the cherry boards were twists. I drew a line down the ridge to make sure I knew where my pressure needed to be and went to work. I just needed to get two adjacent faces flat and at a right angle with each other for all the legs, as well as the walnut that, you know, I didn't film. It's always fun when you look back at a piece of wood that you've had for a long time and you realized, wow, my cat peed on that a while ago. At this point I was able to cut down the cherry legs and walnut into the sizes that I wanted. I did cut the cherry legs a little oversized because my table saw blade kept burning them. I know. I need to clean the blade so it doesn't do that. But I had a week to complete this cabinet, so I used my thickness planer to bring the thickness to where I needed it, and there we go. One of the truly important things that I did to save me a ton of frustration was to have a plywood backer when I was doing my real crosscuts. It all but completely stopped the tear out. All I needed to do to finish the milling process was to run all the boards through the thickness planer, and they were ready for joinery. Also, the thickness planer is spraying wood chips out of the front because I didn't clean out the dust extraction port. I opened it up at the very end of the process, of course, to find that it was completely packed, so that was great. Next up is making the router attachment so I can cut the mortises on the legs and rails. I started by drilling the same holes on opposite corners and cutting grooves so they were parallel to each other. This will allow for the guides to be adjustable. After drilling a hole through the middle and screwing the base on the router, you're ready to go. I used stop blocks and small cuts to help me identify the mortise locations. I had to do two passes with this setup because the router bit I used wasn't exactly the thickness of a half-inch sheet of plywood, which was also, coincidentally, the thickness of the tenons that I was using for the walnut. But this whole setup was incredibly easy. A quick dry fit to make sure that I did the job correctly, and then it's off to cutting panels for the rest of the cabinet. I will say it's beyond important to make sure you square up the sides of those pieces that you're going to be cutting. I don't really have a reliable or dependable plywood outlet near me besides Home Depot, so when I do get plywood, it's almost always skewed somehow, so make sure that you square it up and oh man, you'll be so much happier. In terms of edges, I plan to just soften them throughout the cabinet simply because of the 1/4 inch gaps. But one edge of the legs made a very nice candidate to do a large 1/2 inch round over. My setup here isn't the greatest, but it works for me. If you have an inconsistent feed rate, you'll probably get some burning, so you know, spend some extra time with the sander. I didn't do, you know, too crazy of a sanding regimen here. I just made sure that the inside went to 100 and then the outside faces, because those ones are actually going to be seen and touched, they're the ones that I brought to 320. Before you actually put the cabinet together, you're going to want to make sure that you put the power supply in on time. So with this, I just drilled it out, and I did get some blowout, which was not that important because it's in the back of the cabinet and no one's going to see it. But I chiseled out everything and made sure that it was going to be recessed inside, and then just screwed it in and it was done. After you've sanded and everything and you're ready for finish, make sure that, especially if you have this many pieces, that you are organized. I made sure that I laid them out ahead of time and were ready to go before I started actually oiling, and then just started going. Just like with before, you want to make sure that you also plan the glue up. Glue ups can really quickly get out of hand. So with this, I made sure that I glued up the front panels and the back panels, so they were ready to go, so that when I was actually gluing the side pieces and then the middle pieces, it made it very quick to do and really safe to do. Here's a portion of the final glue up. I didn't do the entire thing because I realized actually that I needed to cut down a little piece before I finished. But everything seemed to go pretty well and glue up pretty nicely, so I'm actually really happy with how it ended up turning out. And here is the final thing. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you got something from this build, and obviously stay tuned for the second part of this series, which will focus on the electronics portion, including the wiring and the controllers. Take care.
Right. And some cut.